It's season 8 and I have some cracking guests lined up. We'll be diving into all things leadership, teamwork, engagement, mental well-being and high performance. We have the conversations that matter about putting the human factor back into business, because when we get people right, we get business right. If you want to find out more about how to develop an experience that brings out the best in people, get in touch. And if you like the idea of building your leaders, managers and culture, one experiment at a time, Leadership Labs may well be for you. Check out details in the show notes. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. I'm trading places and I'm bringing to you a podcast where I was the guest so that you can hear more of my views and expertise on different subjects. These conversations are all about dealing with challenges and questions that consume headspace, whether that's knowing how best to support people, reduce overwhelm, or develop better ways of working. I'm here to help you work out how to do things differently, ultimately increasing employee happiness and outcomes.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Is This Room Free? So going to rip up all the rule book this week and come in with a very, very different format than we've probably ever done before, because I've got my first ever dynamic duo of two people on. So I have Gemma Ellison, who's been a former guest, and Lisa Lloyd, who was a very recent guest just a couple of episodes ago. Gemma, Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Thank you.
So we've we were just having a chat before I hit the record button, then just kind of how we explain this one. So I think I'll try and kind of just cover something off, and then we're just going to kind of start chatting, I think. So any kind of regular listeners who maybe tuned into Gemma's episode ages ago, we were talking about her story and how she had always been interested in kind of culture, but brain had taken her down the route of being a solicitor, but then had circumstantially ended up kind of getting into a passion and ended up kind of working in the world of culture. And I'm all about kind of networking and keeping in touch with people. And me and Gemma kind of kept kind of sharing messages back and forth. And then she, I was going to say a gobby scouse, and then started pestering me. And then I was like, oh no, can't do that, But I've just said it anyway, so it doesn't matter. But you were kind of, we were going back and forth, and then you kind of piped up and said, I want to introduce you to Lisa, because we're going off and we're starting a really exciting venture, and we've kind of come up with this thing, and we want to tell you all about it, and we want to kind of get you involved in it. And then we had a chat, and then I really, really liked it, and I want to kind of bring them onto the kind of the podcast as a, I don't know, we friend of the podcast. We're going to kind of have you as a sponsor in inverted commas, where we're just kind of hopefully going to promote the work that you do, because I think both of you are brilliant, but as a combined duo, and the concept that you got is absolutely fantastic. So I guess, do you know what? I'm going to pass over to kind of one of you and let you do a little introduction of what Leadership Labs is in terms of conceptually, and then let's go back in terms of how we've got here. Yeah?
Gem's pointing at me. Thanks, Gem. Okay, so in a nutshell, Leadership Labs is a really cool space for leaders to come together, either from across different organizations or within an organization, and essentially take their masks off, show you who they really are as human beings beyond what's behind their role, and to get to grips with some of the challenges that are really impacting on them day to day. And for us, that's really, really important, because it's about the space that we create, so that people can have proper check-ins with each other, They can look at what's really going on in their organization. They can start to drill down into their data. They can start to hypothesize about it so that they are then in a position to design something different. And we call it an experiment. It sounds quite daunting for some. It's essentially what's the tiny thing that they can do differently to start to have an impact on those challenges that they're experiencing. But they're doing it within a peer group so that there's peer coaching, they're getting input and support from Gem and I. We introduce some bite-sized chunks of learning around. Here's a resource to go and use, or here's something to go and have a look at, which will help you on your journey. So it's leadership development at its best, because it's been designed specifically to meet the needs that we know are there, but addressing them in a way that's really relevant, rather than all this off-the-shelf stuff that can be really content heavy or time heavy. And it almost adds that sense of pressure on leaders' shoulders to now implement all this new stuff. Whereas we're about actually taking off that stuff off their shoulders and getting to grips with what their reality is, by looking at their own experience and designing something around that. So they're not taking on more, they're actually dealing with the stuff that they're already encountering.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the feedback from obviously people who've participated in it, and one of the things that absolutely comes through from it all is that sense of safe space, where it's not just a kind of content delivery workshop. There's actually a kind of, as you said, peer-to-peer collaboration where you can let your guard down, and you don't have to be I'm the business leader, so I have to know it all. I've been to various of these sorts of things locally myself in kind of my neck of the woods, and the biggest thing I've got out of any of it is we're actually all in the same boat. We're really, some bits we can do great. A lot of the time we're all really struggling. We don't have all of the answers, but somebody in the room might have an answer. And it's just that it's almost like, in a way, Business Owners Anonymous, where everyone kind of just goes, whew, I'm Martin, I run a business, I need a little bit of help, and I need to lean on some of the people at some times, and at other times they can lean on me, and I can offer, share some anecdotes or stuff that I've been through that worked well and didn't work well, and as I say, that's the stuff. Just seeing some of the feedback that you guys have received and kind of posted out there, that's the biggest thing that comes out of it all. It's not just a turn up, sit there, write some notes, and thank you very much, I'll go off and probably forget it 10 minutes later because business got in the way. So, burning question. You're in very, very different parts of the country. How have you two got together?
I'll sort of say this, and it's the power of the peer sort of element for me, and the ability to take a mask off. So Lisa and I met on LinkedIn actually. When I commented about Lisa's podcast, and Lisa stalked my profile and sent me a note. It wasn't like, do you come here often? But it was, it was a look. We talk about the same things. We then developed a sort of a connection, and we'd message every now and then. But the turning point for me was, I was in a job previously, if anyone's listened to the previous episode will know, and I was doing very well in that job. I had transitioned from a lawyer to being director of culture. I was responsible for a lot in the people experience space. And even though it was going well and I was doing a good job, I was getting lots of praise, it was all fine, I just knew there was something more I needed to do, or a bigger impact I could make. And I didn't really. And when I'd asked people, they'd sort of gone, oh no, stay in this job. Don't be leaving something that you've got going well. And I just reached out to Lisa one day and was like, do you mind if I give you a call? And I don't think we'd spoken at this point. And I remember exactly where I was when I spoke, and I rang it and I just said, this is what's going on for me right now. And again, we'd never spoken properly with just a couple of messages on LinkedIn. And Lisa talked me through what it's like being self-employed. She talked to me about the sort of work type and what the world's like out there. and I gained a friend in that moment, and we went to know this was all going to happen, and we worked together very closely now. But in that moment, I was able to be vulnerable with somebody who I didn't know, and so that person was able to be a real friend to me and someone who really helped me. So, and that was right back at the beginning before I sort of left the job that I was in, and that was the start really of a really good friendship. And then I went on Lisa's podcast, and and I've been on that a few times now. That's what sort of happened from my perspective. Have you got any different views on it, Lisa?
No, I think exactly that. And I think you're having the confidence to step out of something that is safe and you're good at, it's familiar, it's regular income. To step away from that, do something different, it does take huge amount of courage. And so that vulnerability meant that you immediately had someone by your side, giving you some advice, which was slightly ironic. Bear in mind, my background at all wasn't business at all either. So I was literally talking about my own experience. But I think what really connected us was that we'd both wanted to go out on our own, not really having a clue of how to set up a business or run one, but feeling so motivated by what we wanted to focus on, by feeling so passionate about being able to do something different in a really kind of cluttered space that is around culture and leadership development and mental well-being, and actually just do something different. There was this kind of, I think both of us were sensing this need for something different. And we both happened to have the conversations where we realized that we both had a lot in common. And when you believe in something enough, and especially when you've got someone by your side who's also able to, when you have those moments of doubt, it can pick you up and go, no, remember, this is why we're doing this. This is the impact we're going to have. And, having that friend by your side and following a very clear direction for a very clear purpose, I think that it makes a huge difference.
I think there's multiple things out of that I would like to kind of comment and build upon, if that's okay. So, for me, that's kind of exactly aligns with why I kind of did exactly what you guys have done. Felt a difference could be made, and doing it in a different way in a very saturated, cluttered space. And I think between us, we've got very common alignments there. But I was at a HR event yesterday run by a company locally called After Athena, and I was speaking about how to kind of boost or accelerate your career, and I took discussions from this podcast that kind of helped me create kind of some of the content for it. And there was a couple of guest speakers through the day, and interestingly, with no prior collaboration, there were some very common themes that each of us raised. I mean, one of them was even a kind of talking about financial management and kind of personal wealth management and how to kind of look after your money better. And even some of his key factors aligned with some of the points that I was raising and some of the other guest speakers, even though we were talking about very, very different things. And one of them was investing your network, build up your network, because your network, you don't know when you're going to need that network. There might not be today, but it might be something in the future that by having a larger network and investing time in that network, it could lead to something in the future. And one of the things was about taking a risk. Now, from financial planning, it was, do you invest in an aggressive pension scheme, or do you take a more risk-averse pension approach with your portfolio? So there was a, risk understanding that. But from a career perspective, it was the majority of people are very, very risk-averse. And I think, as what you said, Gemma, we're still very much in a societal mindset of, work for the big company, that's secure, you'll have a good pension, you won't get made redundant, there'll be job opportunities. The world has changed so much from that. It really has. doesn't matter if you work for a big company, a startup, whatever, you are at risk of redundancy in this day and age. It is prevalent. If you manage to get through your career and not be made redundant, something miraculous has happened to you nowadays. And I think for people to kind of pass that on and have that peer pressure about, we should stay, it's, you know, it's a good job, it's a good firm, it's not right. It's your life, and you know what to do with it, and you will make mistakes along the way, and you will learn better from those mistakes. But you can make life so much better if you take a risk and follow a passion. And as you said, you could be really happy where you are. You could, everything could be fine and dandy, but if there's an itch that's but what if there's something even better? Or but I could be more excited, I could be having more of an impact. You don't want to sit there on your deathbed and go, what if I had done that? You know, if you try it and it fails, absolutely fine. You gave it a go. Nobody can fault you for that. But the worst thing you want to do in life is look back and think, what if?
100%. And I think that for both of us, I think speaking on behalf of both of us, together and separately, we really care about scaling the impact of the work that we do. We both want to create a sort of space where work does not contribute towards the seemingly poor health, and it's getting poorer of a nation or a world. And we want it, you know, both want to make work better. But and that's exactly what happens with labs. And after every single one, we were together in Manchester last month, actually, which was nice. We don't get together too often, but when we do, it's great. We came off the back of a lab, gave each other a hug, because we were like, feedback, the feeling in that virtual room, the fact that people have been able to open up and say things they don't say to anybody else in this space that we've created just fills both of us with immense pride. And it's about, how can we scale that? How can we, you know, we could just stay in one organization and carry on doing great work. There's no problem with that, and that's and doing that is fine for some people, and that's okay. I respect that. But for us, there's a big wide world out there, and there's a lot of people who are struggling, and there's a lot of organizations that we can help to make better. So, and it's going to take some convincing for both of us that labs isn't the way to do it, to be honest. And this, you know, hopefully this is not about, you know, we don't need to sell these things. It's about wanting to show people a different way of doing things, wanting to show people it's all right to be vulnerable. There's a space where we can be held, and that's about doing that with leaders who don't even know each other, but also in organizations. We've both worked in places where we've seen how it works. There's better ways of doing it, and that's what we do with labs, and that's what we love about labs.
With the vulnerability piece came up a lot yesterday as well. So it's I always find it fascinating how independently there are these themes that come up from time to time, and there's a thread, no matter who you are, where in the world you are, what you do. There seems to be this kind of surgence of something, and it seems to be at the moment that, and I really try and kind of promote it through this kind of podcast about the more people open up about things, the more normalized it becomes, and then it's more kind of accepted it becomes. And vulnerability was a huge thing that came up yesterday, about talking about, you know, your mental health, your financial health, your well-being just in work. And you know, we're not saying to everybody you should leave your job and go and start up your own business. That isn't what taking a risk is all about. What we're saying is, you could be really happy where you are. If you could be miserable where you are, but it doesn't have to be being really miserable that is the driver to them making you make change. Things could be really good, but you still might want to take a leap of faith, knowing that there could be something better out there. So I'm going to kind of challenge you both now. So I kind of know the answer to this a little bit because I've spent some time with both of you, but anybody who's listening is going, okay, yada yada yada, they both seem dead nice, but I get these emails from, you know, these sorts of leadership things all the time, and you know, people ringing up or pitching their wares to us. Why the hell should I be interested in what you two have got to say? So why did you create Leadership Labs? Why is it different to anything else? I mean, we've kind of spoke a little bit about it then, but what gave you the gusto? Like, what was the problem that you needed to solve? Maybe that's the best way of asking it.
So I was seeing loads of leaders who were on the verge of burnout, who were feeling completely overwhelmed with the level of challenge they were having to try and work through on their own. And when I talk about leaders, I'm talking about people in HR as well, so who are leading the kind of people side of the business in their capacity.
Well, you're the people who attend aren't just business leaders, are they? They come from kind of any job. Yeah,
and that's also the beauty of it, because you know, I remember one of our first ever labs, one of the leaders who's actually an MD of his company saying, well, what am I going to get from being part of a group with people who are in completely different industries to me? And actually, after what happened and what materialized and what is brought up all the time in our current labs is we all have the same problems, we all face the same challenges, and it doesn't matter what industry we're in, we are all experiencing some of the really, really common themes. So by bringing people together, there's so much emphasis in organizations around send your leaders or send your managers on a program to learn how to be a really good leader or learn how to be a really good manager, and got to learn, you know, here's a handbook and you've got to make loads of days time to this thing, and it's another thing to take on. People are feeling burnt out already, and it's almost like this is something else I've got to fit into my working week and you know, get my head around. And I've always been, and this is what Gemma and I realized we had in common, I've always been a fan of needing to strip back the noise, the complexity, and get beyond all the flashy marketing of here's the next new initiative, and you know, these massive companies saying here's the best thing you can do in terms of leadership development and training. And actually, what we were seeing, what we're seeing actually from the companies we're working with, is people saying, I don't want any more stuff. I just want a space to be able to process where I am at currently and what is currently on my shoulders. So I don't want to be putting anything else. I talk a lot about rucksacks, as Jen will know. So I don't want to be putting anything else in my rucksack that I'm lugging around with me. I actually want to be offloading some of that. So what is some of the stuff that I'm dealing with at the moment? I want to get that out of my rucksack. I want to put it on the table, and I want to talk about that, because that is going to reduce my stress. That's going to improve my mental health and well-being. If I can talk about that stuff with other leaders, particularly if I'm talking about with other leaders in my company, that pulls us together in terms of our sense of alignment and clarity about where we're going. And you're actually taking stuff out of people's to-do lists, off their to-do lists, and helping them feel better about their work experience. So for us, it was so simple. You know, it's such a simple concept, but it's so powerful, because it's about addressing people where they're at now, rather than saying, you know, one of our leaders actually said the thing she loves about this is it's not a deficit model. It's not saying you are not good enough and therefore we need to make you better. It's like, you are where you're at now. There are some things that are quite bumpy along the road because there isn't anyone's role. So let's help you think about how to deal with those in a more effective way, so that your health and well-being are better, your performance is better, you enjoy going to work, any itches you've got, you can scratch, you know, all that stuff. So yeah, Jen, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I'd come out from the sort of, we'll talk in a second about the whole sort of process of it. Although I don't like the word process, but we can't spend hours with me thinking about words I don't like. We'd get lost. But so from the other side of it, this is also about experimentation. And that's what I was seeing from being in organizations and now working with organizations from a sort of consultancy perspective, is you hear these words, right? Let's transform something. I don't know if either of you feel the same, but that's exhausting as a word. Who's got time and capacity right now to transform anything? It just sounds a lot, even as a word. So we ban that word. And for me, I would see these big initiatives being rolled out, loads of money spent on them. It could be anything. It could be, I don't know, doing a new HR system. It could be launching the new L&D concept. It could be launching a new wellbeing program. with no prior thought. It's like, right, let's just do this because it's needed. It's knee jerk. Whereas for us, what we say is think small, act small. How can you hypothesize as to what your actual issue is? So, for example, if you're not having women applying for senior leadership roles, you don't need to send everybody on an inclusive recruitment course. Maybe you just need to make the job description a little bit more accessible or appealing to that audience. That's the experiment. So what we want to get people to do is to think, okay, what is the actual problem here? What is it that we're trying to solve? And to get really granular, and we guide people through that in the labs. And that's why it's called a lab, by the way. It's about experimentation. That's what it's all about. It's a safe space to do that. And then what we'll have people do is design experiments, and again, with our guidance. So they might go away, and that could be about anything. It could be an experiment for them as a leader, personally, about how they run meetings, for example, differently. It could be how we change our process at work for recruitment for senior leaders by doing a simple thing differently. And that's the key here. We talk about degradation of marginal gains. We talk about continuous improvement, but with the concept of thinking small. So it feels really doable. And it's actually helping people to go into their organizations and make meaningful change in a really small, but those small things add up. So it's what we say all the time. What's your 1%? How can you take this concept and make it 1% better? What does that look and feel like for you? So we've of course got the side where people are able to be vulnerable at sort of the third of the session, where people are able to be vulnerable. We then get them into sort of peer coaching situations, but they always come away with an experiment to run. And knowing that they're safe in doing that, we teach them how to evaluate the experiments. But this is all about them doing things don't feel overwhelming. It feels, and this is at our open labs, we can talk about in-house in a second, but it's about how can we take small actions that we can make into habits that will make a big difference in our world. And that's not about throwing loads of money at something or, again, big transformations. It's small, meaningful work. And then just, in terms of what else we saw, a sort of need, people have not got time anymore to be going on a week-long leadership retreat. It's just not possible. And when people are in those programs, for example, and we're sitting there, and I say this being someone who delivers programs all the time, and that's okay as well for some people, but I notice that people are switching off. They're looking at what's on their emails. We haven't got the attention span to be sitting there for 3 days anymore. So what labs are, they're 2.5 hours a month only. And with those 2.5 hours, you wouldn't believe the gold that comes out of those 2.5 hours, much more than someone would get in a 3-day program, which again, I spend my life delivering them. But this is helping people who've got a lack of time, a lack of attention. You can take 2.5 hours away from your emails. You can't really take 3 days. So for us, we wanted to make leadership development accessible and also impactful. And this is the way we've done it.
Can I also add to that, just an example of what you just said, Gem, about the time thing? This morning, we've run a leadership lab, and I had an MD message me yesterday to say, really, really big week at work, which has been a big build-up. The whole lab knows about it. And she said, this Friday is the big day, so I'm not going to be able to come along for the whole 2.5 hours, but I really want to come and do the check-in bit because I really value just touching base with people and hearing what people have to say. And she ended up staying for the full 2.5 hours because she's like, we can leave now. She's like, no, I just want to stay for the next bit, and I'm just going to stay because there's so much. It's creating the space for people to be able to go, I can just pause on all the other demands on me, and I can actually just begin to get my head in a better place and thinking about experiments. What am I going to do differently? But the other, what I'd build on what Gem's just said in terms of what you do with that space and think about your experiments is all about taking risk to fail. And people get so, I think, stuck in, I've got to just do what's tried and tested. I've got to do what's familiar, what we know. I can say what we know works, but often we know that stuff isn't working, but we don't have the courage to be creative and think about it differently. And so when you do an experiment, as with any experiment, it might not provide the results that you want them to provide, but you always learn from it. So if you try something different, we always evaluate because there will be some learning from it. So either it worked brilliantly, it partly worked, or it didn't work at all. But whatever happens, you learn from that. And it's about getting closer to the place you want to be. It's getting closer to the outcome you want to achieve. Whereas if we don't do anything different, we can guarantee we'll just get more and more of the same. And we know that that has to change, because this is, companies have been talking for years now about stuff just isn't getting better for people in organizations.
I'm going to go off on a tangent, because I find this specific bit really, really interesting. And as you originally started talking about it, Gemma, I was kind of, I find it interesting that they've defined it as kind of experimentation, because for me, that's just what goes on day to day in your personal life and in your work life. Everything is a decision. Who in their lives has got every single decision they've ever made right? No one. Because it's all, life is an experiment. Sometimes you'll get it right, sometimes you'll get it wrong. When do you learn your best? The times that it went wrong. And for me, in your personal life, you can make a decision and you can get it wrong, and the repercussions are minimal. Generally, I'm talking very broad brush here. Decided to get the car over, get the train. I got stuck in traffic. Should have taken the train. I decided to take the train over the bus. The train was late. I was late for my meeting. Should have, whatever. But there's no massive repercussions. Nobody's judging you. Just, you should have, you should have taken the alternative vehicle of transport. But in work, it almost is flipped on its head. And most organizations, there is this huge fear factor of getting it wrong. If I do experiment, what's going to happen to me? My boss is going to think badly of me. I might not then get that promotion. That might then affect how people judge me. The company might perceive that I've wasted money. Maybe, all of these kind of, and it amplifies and it compounds. So what do? I'll try and make as minimal risks as possible, and I'll try and do the safest thing that I can possibly do, which is the thing that everybody else did before us. And how much are we evolving and improving things? Very, very minimally. Why? Because nobody wants to put their head above the parapet and be the person who gets shot for doing something that was different. But then perversely, look at the tech companies who come up with a new product. Look at entrepreneurs. Listen to the Dragon's Den. How many businesses have they run, and the majority have failed and the minority have succeeded, yet they're applauded for the ones that have succeeded? And I always think, for me, it comes down to, ironically, culture. Are you creating an environment where it's okay to make mistakes? Or are you operating in a business where, if you do decide to invest this ATS that's going to cost you a huge amount of money and it doesn't work, well, is that your fault because you went through the biggest amount of due diligence you could? But some of it just, you were never going to know. Recruitment, the business I'm in, I was talking to somebody yesterday because we put a shortlist over and she was kind of querying. I was like, it's a leap of faith. The person can tell me everything that I think is great. You're going to interview them. You're going to make a decision. Is it always going to work out? No. You hope the person is going to be amazing, but it's going to be a leap of faith whether that person delivers everything they say they want, that they're going to deliver. Life is one big experiment, but it's just that, I'm ranting here, but in the world of business, we do not have an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes, and therefore they limit themselves and they limit their decision making to just do what's always been done. And I don't know where I'm going with that point, but I'm just making a big point.
No, I'll add something on there. We've done so on Lisa's podcast, Beyond the Water Cooler, and we've got an episode there where we've talked about organisations being future ready. And I would go as far as saying, and again, I think I speak for both of us, if organisations are not embracing experimentation and being able to fail, and if being a safe space to do so, they won't be here in 10 years' time. So the best time to start in terms of getting your team able to sort of experiment, getting them into that mindset, getting the system in place where people can fail is really, really important. But just to your point there, Martin, about the fact that we move through life doing experiments, we do, absolutely. What we don't tend to do is evaluate them, though. And that's a big part of the lab. So we will have people come back in and actually evaluate what's happened. What were the key learnings? What would you do differently next time? Have you tested it with a small group? Because we can do due diligence for the rest of time, and we can prep and we can do all these different things. Best thing to do is just test it. How can you every day test something different rather than, again, we're in this world, aren't we, where it needs to be a finished product, it needs to be perfect before we launch it. No, just test it in small groups. You'll get your feedback. We're doing some work, and I wonder at least whether you can speak to the in-house lab stuff and what we're doing with one of our clients there. But we're seeing them all go away and doing little tests, and they're seeing the sort of benefits of doing that because they're seeing results much quicker. If you spend 6 months trying to develop a product and then it's a big launch and then it flops, what use is that? That's investments in resource, in time, in people, all the money and all this kind of thing. Why don't you just get it out quickly and test it? You'll then get feedback very, very quickly. You know if it works. If it does, build it out. If it doesn't, switch it up. But I think the point that you made there, in that it's a change in culture, is spot on. And with our labs, we teach people how to do it. And particularly if we're in organizations, teach them, again, how to sort of implement that as part of their culture. And at the end of the 6 months, they don't need us anymore. What they're left with is a way to do it so that when they're finished with labs, when a challenge comes in, they know exactly what to do with how to check in, how to voice challenges, how to hypothesize, how to design an experiment, and then move. So that's like, yeah, I think it is definitely a culture shift.
And I think also part of that culture shift, picking up on what you said, Martin, you talked about habits. And I think, there was a report, it was circulated on LinkedIn recently around what's really effective, what's not effective. And actually what we need to focus on in terms of development of people is around habits, changing habits. It's not about filling them with more knowledge about how to do stuff and just focusing on filling people's heads with things. It's actually about how we change habits. And what came out of our lab this morning when we were talking about being intentional, and it's just a word I used in a sentence about something, and one of the leaders was like, actually, that's a word that means we need to hang on to. And then someone else picked up on that theme. So actually, we need to be more intentional about how we show up and what we're doing, because although we have, so some of these people, they're talking about their experience, they know what they should be doing. For example, one person was talking about chunking their time to be more effective with how they stay on top of their enormous workload. And he was saying, but I keep slipping into my old habits. And there's, as we talked about, right, how do you create the new habit and how do you keep that alive so you don't automatically slip into what's tried and tested for you under moments of pressure? Because we know how our brain works, we'll always go to the simplest route when we're under pressure. So we talk a lot about habits and how to create that real change, which is another huge part of actually development and a part of the evaluation. And that's what we're doing with the in-house lab that we're running at the moment, which we are loving, because the organisation who brought us in to look at what they're doing as a leadership team had a survey, and they had all these kind of points raised as these are areas for development, as a lot of companies do, a lot of surveys. And it's like, now what? And so they had some really good data, and we have been able to put together like a essentially bespoke lab, taking their top 6 areas from their and the key priorities from their survey, and each lab we have designed around one of their key priorities with a deep dive as like an extra workshop where we actually are giving information and giving resources and so on as well. And it means that you've got this leadership team who are together saying, right, this is a priority. We know the data. We know what people have said in our organization. And now we're going to look at how to break that down into experiments. So it might be if they were looking at recruitment and retention, or we're looking at, actually they're looking at values as one of the first points as a focus for the lab. They looked at that across the employee life cycle. So all of them are responsible for different parts of the employee life cycle. So it could all go and say, right, how does this look in our part of the organization? What can we do to start making sure that those values are right and they are relevant and they are showing up in everything we do and they are being recognized, and they're starting to really drill down into values, but by each looking at how that relates to their particular role and their part of the organization. And then you get everyone back together and they're talking about what that feels like and what that looks like. And, there's a real buzz there because people know they're making progress on the stuff that's important to them and that their workforce are saying is important to them.
So you've got the kind of leadership labs where it's kind of external, kind of multi organization, so kind of different people from kind of all kind of different organizations, and then you've also got the kind of internal leadership labs where you will go in and work with one specific organization then. And how do you find that you sometimes get a mix of people? I don't know, I'm guessing maybe someone's kind of come onto the leadership lab and then thought, oh, actually I want you to bring you into my organization to do a deeper dive into stuff. Is that kind of where it usually kind of works?
Not usually, but it has come up. So we definitely get approached from people who are currently on an open lab where they've got different organizations saying, actually, we need some of this in our own industry.
You call it an open lab, which is
an open, and then an in-house. And I think it's that value of, when you experience something, you think, God, actually, my peers need some of this. And I think it goes back to your earlier point, Martin, right at the start of this conversation around, there are so many people doing so many things in this market. How do you stand out? How do you make yourself known for what you're doing? And it's, word of mouth is so powerful, because if you say to an organization, get your leadership team together, and send them on the leadership lab, or get the leadership lab in, and they're like, often the some of the resistance that will pop up immediately, again, as a natural habit, is I can't take anything else on. So I can't even fit in 2.5 hours a month, or maybe having an extra hour deep dive, whatever, because I'm already overwhelmed. And I was talking to one of the leaders this morning who's wanting the lab in-house in his organization, about that 2.5 hours is about focusing on the behaviors and the habits and how that team operates as a collective and how each leader operates individually. That makes the rest of the month much more productive. The performance is better. People feel better. They're able to turn up with greater energy and focus because they're dealing with all the stuff that they're carrying around with them. So it's not about learning and trying to carve out 2.5 hours to take on more. It's about actually have that 2.5 hours to make the rest of the month feel a lot better.
Yeah, just to bring it on that as well, about talking about the reality of what they're going through. A lot of times with programs, it may be that say someone could come to me tomorrow and go, Gem, starting in November, please could you do a 3-month leadership program for us, 2 days a month, whatever, and this is what we want you to talk about. So that it might be inclusive recruitment, it might be unconscious bias, it might be emotional intelligence. That's in November. This is what tends to happen. Where it's like real talk in real time. So if someone comes and says, we've got this problem right now. So if it's an in-house lab, for example, and someone rings us and goes, look, we know we're meant to be doing this next week based on our survey, but actually we've got this real issue now, then that's what we deal with. It's just in time work rather than just in case. So this is getting to the root causes of issues in organizations and helping to build cohesive leadership teams who are empowered themselves. And that's much more powerful. So just against the values point that Lisa just made about one of our in-house labs, they could bring us in and we could do loads of values workshops with the whole organization and we could map it out across the entire employee life cycle. But when a leadership team are doing it themselves and they're taking ownership, that's much more powerful. And again, both can work in different ways. That's no problem. But actually what we're doing is taking it apart for them, breaking it into little bits. How can you improve this in a small way? Okay, go out and do it. So they do that in their own organization. But again, it's not an overwhelming 6-month project on the one topic. It's actually, what can we do a little bit each time? That increases engagement in organizations massively because they see an empowered and excited leadership team. And also, by the way, we have some people come along who think, why on earth am I here? That only lasts for a very short time, because at the end of the lab, they always feel grateful for being there. But this, again, is about how helping them to drive meaningful change that's in their organisation. Doesn't matter what anyone else is doing, but what's personal to them.
I think that's a really good. Can I just add there? Sorry, Martin. This is your podcast, and I'm just talking over you. This morning we talked about stress mapping in our open lab. So we talk about test tubes because we're in a lab and we're creating experiments. And we have what we call test tubes of knowledge. So we'll have a 20-minute section of the lab where we will talk about and share resources and say, right, based on what we're hearing from you, we think this might be a useful resource to take away and try. And going back to Gem's point about it being really, really relevant and timely, we only confirmed yesterday that we were doing stress mapping today. So we knew, the date has been in the diary, everyone's diaries for a long time, that we've got a lab happening this morning, but we only confirmed, we asked the group, what do they want the test tube to be? So what is front of mind for them? And they will talk about, change and uncertainty. So we'll say, right, well, in that case, we'll do something. That 20-minute test tube bit will be around change and uncertainty. And sometimes it's literally 24 hours before, they're like, actually, can we focus on X, Y, or Z? And then that's what we'll design the lab around. So it is really responsive to what they are bringing to that lab. And that's, I think, also part of the magic of it.
Well, before you rudely interrupted, no, I mean, you say it's my podcast, but I always say I'm just the conduit to all of this. It's it's the guests who are bringing the show, really. But I was gonna kind of lean into what you just said, Gemma, and before you kind of even said it, I kind of had this question of, I don't know if kind of fear or skepticism are the right words to be using, but we are ingrained to receiving off-the-shelf products because that's the most efficient way to deliver something externally. I'll write a course. It's not necessarily individual to you. Hopefully enough of it will cover enough bases for enough people or companies out there. I only have to write it once, job done, package it up, this is the price, when do you want me? And that's what we used to, just as consumers, whether it's personal or business, that is kind of what we're just generally used to. So when you kind of talk about this kind of just-in-time type approach or real-time type approach to it all, we know whenever anybody's I'm not going to talk about the open labs because I think the open labs, somebody has willingly signed up to it. It's very rarely I would anticipate somebody's pushed to join one of these. So when we talk about the kind of the in-house ones, you put anybody on something like this, there's always going to be somebody who's really excited and then a load of others who are like, as you said, I've got so much work to do, I do not need to add this to my rucksack. What's the response like then? Like, as you said, people kind of can come in with skepticism and it's quickly kind of turned around in terms of actually participating in it. But is there any skepticism around your ability to be so bespoke? Because we used to just go in, okay, we're going to have a leadership program and they're going to just talk about these 6 key themes. Great, I'm going to sit there, maybe take a little bit from it, but be glad when it's done so I can get back to my emails as quick as possible. What's the response like of people when it is so, I mean, we're not talking bespoke, this is ridiculously bespoke. This is, as you said, absolutely real time. This isn't a general theme of what's going on in our company. This is, right, what is happening to you guys? Not when we spoke a month ago, but yesterday.
Yeah, so I think with that as well, so people might be listening to this thinking, do you know what, I know we need something, but I don't really know what it is. We don't just leave people to tell us, there's your 6 topics. We will work with them. So before we will go anywhere in-house, we will meet with them first and have a conversation. And of course, we know the right questions to ask to sort of probe what it is they need. and then we will design something and say, this is what we think you need based on what you're telling us. So it's not, because sometimes there's so many things happening, where do you even start? And I get that. I completely get how business owners or leaders or whoever might be feeling there. They might be thinking, do you know what? Like I don't even know where to start. So we don't just sort of leave you to it. We will guide you through that process and help sort of decide what's right. Also, again, if you've got a survey, for example, and you think, I've got all this information, and this is why people don't like doing surveys sometimes. It's the so what element of it. So surveys are very useful. We deal with data. Data can comprise of different things. But again, we're talking about the reality of the situation. So we will guide them through a process. Then we design something and say, this is what we think you need. What do you think? And it's a bit of a process. But in terms of people's ability and sort of, you're coming in thinking, I've got so much to do. I don't want to add another thing to my rucksack. I would feel that way. For example, if I had an invite to my diary tomorrow, which said, right, you're going to go on an inclusive recruitment course next Friday, and it's a whole day. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I haven't got a full day to go on that. And I'm not going to be recruiting until 6 months' time because we're on a recruitment freeze. So how can I engage with that topic? And that tends to happen. People have to go on something that they might not use at any point. And it's, again, I think you can learn from anything in any situation. I'm a big believer in that. So you'll always pick up something. But we get engagement because we're dealing with their reality. So it's relevant to the person. So we've had some people in some of our in-house labs who we've known before might be thinking, I'm too busy for this. And interestingly, because of, again, the concept and because of the process, and because we're talking about marginal gains, we're not overwhelming people. We also don't use theoretical models and all this kind of thing. It's real time, real talk, real life sort of thing. So they'll come away, and we've seen people change in the space of a lab, genuinely being someone who's really quiet and won't normally say anything in a session for anyone, to being really engaged. And how can we make this work? Because it's about progress, and that is more attractive and more beneficial to an organization than them going and listening to a random talk on something that you might not ever need to use, or you might not need to use it until 6 months' time. And it's like, look, Martin, we had a chat in my first podcast with you about my view of education. We went down a rabbit hole on that. Have I used Pythagoras' theorem since? No, it's not relevant to me. So do I retain that in my brain? No. If I was going to go on a course on that tomorrow, I wouldn't turn up. However, if you set me on a course tomorrow about learn how to experiment with a marketing campaign for my new business, now we're talking. It's relevant to me. It's real. That's what I'm going to go for. So that's what I think in terms of what you've just asked.
Can I add something? I can put my hand up.
Is it about Pythagoras? If it is, then no.
I think I might have missed that one.
You know what? I might just kick you out of the room, Lisa, and me and Gemma. It's just getting rude now.
I'm building on one of your excellent points, Martin, because I thought it was really interesting that you brought up fear and this kind of, for some people's preference for taking off-the-shelf programs. And I was talking at a Guernsey Mind conference last year about fear and about people engaging with labs. I was talking about labs, and we were talking about data and how people might be fearful of engaging with something that's a different approach, or engaging with a way of finding out what's really going on. And I think that fear sometimes comes from uncovering what's really going on in your organization. So some people are quite fearful of looking in the mirror and turning the lens inwards. And it's very easy to say, we're just going to go and get an off-the-shelf program, and we're going to give people more and more and more skills and knowledge and hope that it makes everything better. It can be, it takes quite a lot of courage to say, actually, rather than doing that, we're just going to look at what's going on right now within our organization and deal with that. And there is, for some leaders in particular, there's the fear factor of what's that going to uncover. Because as soon as we uncover something, or as soon as we start having the conversations about something, I'm then obliged to do something about it. So there's that kind of, for some leaders, there'll be that easier path, which is actually, let's not uncover that. And let's just keep sending people on more and more courses and upskilling them and hoping that they get on and solve all the problems, rather than actually dealing with the problems we have, or checking to find out if we have got any problems. I haven't found a company yet who hasn't, but yeah, so I think for the fear bit and the off-the-shelf bit, I think often it'll come back to that sense of well, we've really got to look at what's going on. But that's the whole point, because unless we deal with what's really going on, nothing's really going to change.
Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant point to raise, because it's real and it's true and it exists, and we all want the world to think we're doing a great job, and actually there can be some real issues going on, and they do need to be fixed. The ostrich head in the sand has never, well, I don't know, it might have done, but I'm yet to be aware of it when it's ever fixed anything. I think it's brilliant. I think it's such a clever concept, but it's clever because it's so simple and obvious. And yeah, as with the best things, the most obvious solution is usually the best, and generally doesn't exist out there. I just think it's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, how if somebody's interested, then how can they participate? How can they get you guys into their business?
Well, they can certainly contact us and have a chat. And we always say, like, there's, again, people have fear about that. It's like, if I contact Gem or Lisa, reach out on LinkedIn or email or whatever, I'm guessing you'll put our contact details in the notes. But if people want to reach out, they often will think we've got to have the right thing to say. We've got to know exactly what we're asking for, or we've got to be ready to say we want to sign up. And actually, sometimes people just are curious, and I think curiosity is a really good thing. So be able to say, I'm just thinking, or I'm just wondering about how labs might be, if they're relevant for us, or not even to talk specifically about labs, and to say this is where we're at, and we're just wondering where to go next. And I think having just a conversation, particularly HR people in recruitment, any leaders, people are often given a whole load of things to sort out. It's like, this is your job, you've got to go and work all this stuff out, and it can feel really overwhelming and really lonely. So to just be able to have a conversation with someone that's really friendly, it just it goes back to the whole point at the start of the conversation about having a friend by your side on that journey to say, how do we do this? Knowing there's no one way of doing anything. It's about it being organic and developing in that way. So there's a web page people can look at, which is on my website. It's timeforchange.co.uk, and you can just look at leadership labs, and it tells you about in-house labs, it tells you about open labs. So people can find out more there as well. We've actually got, because we've got an open lab starting next in September, we're taking bookings now. We've got various, we've got an offer on at the moment, which is an early booking one, which finishes on the 21st of June. So if people want to make most of that, then book quick, because we only have a limited number of places. That's the other thing to say, is we keep the labs really small to make sure that the quality of conversation is really, really good.
And I guess if you want to try before you buy, we're going to be doing an event in early July for anybody who thinks, well, I like this, and it's actually going to be a HR professional bring a non-HR person to the event, which is a long mouthful, but bring somebody along from your organization to see what it's all about, and there'll be some little workshops in there. Fantastic. Well, ladies, thank you so much. People will hear you on a regular basis as an interlude, if you will, on the podcast. But it's been a pleasure catching up, hearing all about it. I think it's just brilliant. But you wouldn't be here if I didn't. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing it.
Thanks, Martin. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. What have you taken from it? What has it inspired you to think about or do differently? Please give the podcast a simple thumbs up on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'd be especially grateful if you leave a short review. It makes a real difference. If you join the club, you'll be the first to hear about relevant updates and free downloadable resources that are part of developing practice and performance. Do reach out to me directly to discuss your challenges at work. And if we're not already acquainted on LinkedIn, let's connect. All the links you need are in the show notes. Until next time, bye for now.